The jobs AI is most likely to destroy in the next decade aren't the ones you've been worrying about. Think about the trades for a second. Your plumber, your electrician, the person who rewires your house or fixes your boiler. Those jobs are probably safer right now than they've been in a generation. What's actually in the crosshairs is the white-collar work that millions of people spent 4, 5, 6 years at university specifically training for. Legal research, radiological analysis, financial modeling, junior software development, mid-level accounting. Those are the roles quietly disappearing from job boards right now, and the people holding them are, statistically speaking, among the most educated workers in the world. Now, I'll admit up front, I find this genuinely difficult to write about without sounding either catastrophist or naively optimistic, and I've probably landed somewhere in the awkward middle. But here's the thing. Whether you think AI is the greatest economic engine in human history or the beginning of a slow-motion catastrophe depends almost entirely on which side of a very specific line you happen to be standing on. And understanding where that line actually falls and why is what this video is really about. So to really understand this, we need to work through a few key questions. First, why is this technological shift different from the ones that came before it? And is the economy actually as adaptable as the optimists claim? Second, who are the real winners and losers here? And is it as clean as skilled workers win, unskilled workers lose? Because the data is more complicated than that. Third, what does history actually tell us about economic disruptions this fast? And finally, is there a version of this story where most people come out the other side okay? Because I genuinely don't know the answer to that last one. And I think you should be suspicious of anyone who says they do. Before we get into any of that, let me explain why economists are more nervous about this wave of automation than they were about previous ones. Because the distinction matters, and it's actually pretty intuitive once you see it. Think about a coffee shop. The espresso machine didn't replace the barista. It made the barista faster, more consistent, able to serve more customers per hour. The machine and the human worked together. And economists call this complementary capital. Tools that multiply what a human worker can do without substituting for them entirely. For most of the 20th century, that's how new technology worked. A truck driver covers more ground than a horse and cart. A spreadsheet lets an accountant handle more clients. A CNC machine makes a machinist more precise. In each case, the human remained essential, just more productive. But AI is behaving differently. Oh, at least for a significant chunk of the workforce. It's not making lawyers faster at reading case law. It's reading the case law itself, summarizing it, flagging the relevant precedents, and delivering an output that a junior associate would have taken 12 hours to produce. It's not helping a radiologist work through scans more quickly. In several peer-reviewed studies, AI diagnostic systems have matched or outperformed human radiologists at detecting certain early-stage cancers. In these cases, AI isn't the espresso machine. It's closer to a fully automated cafe that doesn't need a barista at all. Economists call this substitutive capital, and the distinction matters enormously for what happens next. The uncomfortable question, and nobody has a clean answer to this, is what share of the modern economy falls into each category. The McKinsey Global Institute estimated in 2023 that roughly 60 to 70% of current work activities could be automated with existing or near-existing technology. But could be and will be are doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Right? So here's where it gets genuinely surprising. And this is the part that I think most of the coverage gets wrong. The conventional wisdom is that AI will hit low-skilled, low-wage work hardest. And yes, those jobs are absolutely at risk. But the conventional wisdom misses something important. So are a huge number of high-skilled, high-wage jobs that involve pattern recognition, synthesis, and structured analysis. And weirdly, some of the most physically demanding, cognitively unpredictable, medium-wage jobs, the trades, the care sector, skilled construction, are proving remarkably resilient. To see why, think about three workers: a warehouse picker, a tax attorney, and an electrician. The conventional story says the warehouse picker is most at risk. But consider what each job actually requires. The warehouse picker does physical work in an unpredictable, constantly changing environment. Robots can do this, but it's mechanically complex and expensive, especially in older facilities. The tax attorney does highly structured cognitive work that follows rules, precedents, and established patterns. That is exactly what large language models are extraordinarily good at. And the electrician? They're doing physically demanding, spatially complex work in wildly inconsistent environments. A different house every day, different layouts, different problems, combined with client communication and a kind of embodied knowledge that machines are still decades from replicating. Of these three, the tax attorney is arguably the most replaceable in the near term. That is a deeply weird sentence to write, but the data is starting to back it up. The Oxford Economics Report from 2024 found that occupations requiring digital literacy and creative problem-solving saw the fastest wage growth over the previous decade. But it also found that the next tier down, roles requiring structured analytical thinking without significant creative or interpersonal components, had seen wage stagnation or mild decline even before widespread AI adoption. Those roles are now facing an accelerating headwind. Now, the picture gets considerably darker when you zoom out from individual jobs to entire economies. Because while the developed world is wrestling with a complex reshuffling of who wins and who loses within their labor markets, several developing economies are facing something categorically more serious: the wholesale elimination of the growth model they've spent 30 years building. Here's the economic logic that made countries like the Philippines, Bangladesh, and Vietnam into serious players in the global economy. Starting in the 1990s, multinational companies began offshoring routine service work, customer support, transcription, back-office processing, basic coding, to countries where educated workers could do those jobs at a fraction of the cost. For the Philippines, this became a $37 billion industry employing 1.3 million people and contributing over 7% of GDP. Well, it turns out those jobs were outsourced to developing economies for precisely the same reason. They can now be outsourced to an algorithm. They're structured, rule-based, and don't require the kind of physical presence or unpredictable human judgment that's hard to replicate cheaply. An LLM can handle a customer service query in seconds, in any language, 24 hours a day, without health insurance, without sick leave, without a commute. Since the IMF estimated in 2024 that up to 89% of outsourced service jobs in the Philippines face elevated automation risk. That's not a slow erosion. That's a structural collapse of an entire growth model. And here's the part that genuinely keeps development economists up at night. There's no obvious next rung on the ladder. When manufacturing jobs left the US and Europe for East Asia in the 1980s and 90s, workers in countries like China, South Korea, and then Taiwan moved up the value chain over time. But that ladder worked because each rung took time, and workers had time to move up. AI isn't giving anyone that time. The Center for Economic Policy Research projects that wealthy nations could see GDP boosts of around 5.4% over the next decade from AI-driven productivity gains, while lower-income countries are looking at closer to 2.7 to 3.5%. And that's before accounting for the jobs those countries stand to lose in the transition. So we've been here before, right? Kind of. In the late 18th century, a group of English textile workers called the Luddites went around smashing mechanized looms. And they've been turned into a punchline, people who just couldn't handle progress. But historians who've actually studied them point out that the Luddites weren't against technology per se. They were against technology being deployed in ways that destroyed their livelihoods and concentrated the gains in the hands of factory owners, which is, frankly, a pretty reasonable objection. The data from that period is sobering. Between 1780 and 1840, the British GDP roughly doubled on the back of industrialization, and real wages for ordinary workers barely moved. Some estimates suggest they actually declined. It took about 60 years for productivity gains from the Industrial Revolution to meaningfully show up in working-class wages. 60 years. That's not a rounding error. That's 2 or 3 generations of people who didn't benefit. Now, a fair objection here, and this is genuinely worth taking seriously, is that we adapted. Eventually. Now, the Industrial Revolution created new industries, new jobs, new categories of work that nobody had anticipated. The same happened with computers, with the internet, with mobile phones. Each wave of technological disruption looked apocalyptic in the short run, and turned out to be broadly positive in the long run. The economists who make this argument aren't wrong, exactly. The historical record does support the idea that technology creates more jobs than it destroys, over long enough time horizons. But this criticism has a real limitation, and it's worth sitting with. Long enough time horizons is doing enormous moral work in that sentence. If you're 45 years old, working in data processing or legal research or financial analysis, and your job is automated away in the next 5 years, the fact that your grandchildren will probably have fine careers in whatever industries emerge in the 2050s is not actually comforting. The economic pain doesn't get retroactively erased by long-run optimism. The communities that bore the brunt of deindustrialization in Detroit or Sheffield or the Welsh valleys in the 1980s are still, 40 years later, measurably poorer, sicker, and more economically fragile than the rest of their countries. History says things get better eventually. History is also silent on what happens to the people in the meantime. And yes, I realize the irony of me, someone making a video about AI inequality, funded by the very kind of advertising economy that AI is reshaping, telling you to worry about who captures the economic gains here. But let's actually look at the numbers, because they're striking. PwC estimated that AI could add roughly $15.7 trillion to global GDP by 2030. That sounds extraordinary until you look at how that wealth is distributed. And about 70% of those gains are projected to flow to just 2 countries, the United States and China. Within wealthy countries, the concentration is similarly stark. In 2024, over 1,100 US-based AI companies raised significant funding rounds, more than double the total for all of Europe combined. So, what actually happens next? And what can be done? Some countries are already trying to get ahead of it by asking the right questions about reskilling and digital inclusion. Whether strategies like these will work at the scale and speed required is genuinely uncertain. A recent analysis of 12 million US job postings found something that's either hopeful or infuriating depending on your perspective. AI adoption tends to increase demand for the kinds of skills it can't replicate. Complex interpersonal communication, creative synthesis, ethical judgment, embodied physical problem solving. And the optimistic reading is that humans will always have something to offer. The pessimistic reading is that we're going to need to radically restructure how we educate people, how we compensate work, and how we share productivity gains. and we've never actually managed to do any of those things quickly enough to prevent serious harm during a major economic transition. So, does AI make the world better or worse? I genuinely think the honest answer is both at the same time for different people, at different speeds, with consequences that will play out over decades in ways that are extremely difficult to predict. The long-run optimists might be right that this is another chapter in the long story of technology raising human living standards. The short-run pessimists might also be right that the transition is going to be brutal for a significant number of people and economies, and that eventually it gets better is cold comfort if you're living through the eventually. What I'm fairly confident about, and I'm hedging here because complex economic predictions have a spectacular record of being wrong, is that the gap between those who own and shape AI and those who are displaced by it is going to be one of the defining political and economic questions of the next 20 years. How we answer it, collectively, will probably tell us more about what kind of societies we actually want to build than any number of optimistic projections about long-run GDP growth. And the data doesn't tell us what to want. That part's still up to you.